wind didn't whisper across the high desert that night. It screamed. A raw, ancient voice ripped from the throat of the world, scouring the mesas of New Mexico, tearing at the brittle sage and carrying the bitter scent of distant snow and forgotten pain. It was a sound that hollowed out the soul, a sound that spoke of endings. And somewhere, lost within its furious lament, was another sound, thin, desperate, a human thread unraveling against the storm's roar. A sound that should not exist in this vast, indifferent emptiness. A sound that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. Tutsaya, Tudasa, felt the storm's fury long before it crested the Sangre de Cristo peaks. It lived in the sudden stillness of the hawks, in the frantic scurry of lizards vanishing into cracks in the sun-baked earth, in the way the light bled out of the sky, leaving behind bruised purple and angry orange smeared across the endless dome. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ, the great storm spirit, was riding hard. He knew this land, this Parahuya, the desert high country, in his bones. Its moods were etched into him, a map older than memory. He was Nʉmʉnʉ Comanche, though the word felt heavy now, a mantle worn thin by solitude. 35 winters had carved lines beside his eyes, deep in the canyons that gashed the earth below his vantage point. 5 winters since the sickness came, riding the breath of white traders up the Pecos, taking his wife, Tupu, little bird, and their small son, Tahoya eagle, leaving only ash and silence in a lodge that was no longer a home. 5 winters since he turned his back on the remnants of his band. The grief of canyon too wide to cross, the pity in their eyes a weight he couldn't bear. Now, he moved like a shadow against the coming dark, a solitary figure descending a treacherous arroyo wall. His worn leather leggings whispered against the rock, his shirt, once brightly beaded by Tupu's hands, now faded and patched, clung damply to the skin. The wind, arriving with the force of a kicked stallion, slammed into him, snatching at the single eagle feather braided into his long black hair. He braced, leaning into its push, eyes scanning the rapidly darkening landscape below. His camp, a shallow cave tucked beneath an overhang near a hidden seep spring, was still a hard hour's walk. He carried only essentials, a bough of seasoned Osage orange, arrows fletched with hawk feathers, a flint knife worn smooth at the hilt, a water skin, and a small pouch of dried venison. His wealth was knowledge, where the water hid, which roots sustained, how to read the language of the wind and stars. A flicker of movement, unnatural against a wind-whipped scrub, caught his eye far below, near a skeletal line of posts and wire, a rancher's claim staking violence on the open range. Something pale strained against the gray-brown desolation, not an animal, human shape, motionless, yet radiating a terrible tension. Tutsaya froze, every sense sharpening. The wind screamed masking sound, but the image burned. A figure bound upright to one of those unforgiving posts, head slumped, dark hair lashing like a wounded thing. A woman? Abandoned? Left as warning? Or bait? The Nʉmʉnʉ in him warred with the hermit. The land was harsh. Survival demanded caution, detachment. Interference invited danger, the kind that came with guns and whiskey and careless hatred. Yet, the memory of Tupu, fragile and fierce, rose unbidden. The image of abandonment, of exposure to Pia Nʉmʉnʉ's full wrath, was an obscenity against the spirit of the earth itself. He scanned the horizon, searching for riders, for watchers. Only the storm's advance painted the sky. Decision, swift and silent as a striking snake, settled in him. He adjusted his path, descending faster now, his movements fluid and economical, a man attuned to the desert's rhythm even as it raged against him. The closer he got, the starker the scene. The fence post stood isolated, a stark sentinel in a shallow depression. The figure was indeed a young woman, perhaps barely past girlhood. She was lashed cruelly tight, wrists bound behind the post with coarse rope that had bitten deep into her flesh, blood dried dark against the raw skin. Her simple calico dress was torn and stained, clinging to a frame too thin. Her face, turned away from the worst of the wind-driven grit, was obscured by tangled hair, but he saw the tremor that ran through her, a shiver that spoke of exhaustion battling encroaching cold. She wasn't dead. Not yet, but the storm would finish what her captors had begun. Tutsaya approached cautiously, not just scanning the land but feeling it. No scent of horses beyond the storm's ozone. No tracks not instantly erased by the wind. Only the keening air and the desperate vulnerability of the girl. He saw the frayed ends of the rope where she'd struggled. He saw the dried tear tracks cutting through the dust on her cheeks. He saw the utter, broken stillness that comes when hope has fled. He didn't speak. Words were meaningless here, lost in the gale. Instead, he moved behind a post, his flint knife flashing dully in the fading light. The rope was thick, hardened by sun and neglect. He saw it carefully, deliberately, avoiding her raw skin. The girl flinched violently at the first touch of the blade near her wrist, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Tutsaya paused, then resumed his work with slow, deliberate pressure. It took minutes that felt like hours under the storm's assault. Finally, the last strand parted. The girl's arms fell limply to her sides. She sagged, her knees buckling, no strength left to hold herself up. He caught her before she hit the stony ground. She was feather-light, a bundle of bones and chilled skin. Her eyes fluttered open for a terrifying second. Wide, wild, the color of storm-threatened sky, filled with a primal animal fear before rolling back. Unconsciousness or retreat. He gathered her against him, shielding her body from the worst of the wind with his own. She smelled of dust, sweat, fear, and the faint, metallic tang of blood. He adjusted his grip, cradling her head against his shoulder, her dark hair whipping across his neck. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. The storm was intensifying. The first icy needles of rain began to sting his face. His cave was the only refuge. The journey back was a battle. The wind howled, shoving against him like a physical adversary. Rain, cold and sharp, quickly soaked through their clothing. The girl was a dead weight, her slight form becoming heavier with each step as fatigue gnawed at his own reserves. He navigated by instinct, finding handholds in the darkening chaos. Skirting treacherous scree slopes, the landscape rendered alien and hostile by the storm. Lightning cracked, illuminating the world in stark, terrifying monochrome, jagged mesas, skeletal trees. The relentless downpour. Thunder boomed, shaking the ground beneath his feet. He focused only on the next step, the next breath, the fragile life he carried. The image of the fence post, the cruel rope, the utter abandonment, fueled his resolve. This was not the way, not in his world. He found the entrance to the cave more by memory than sight, a deeper shadow against the cliff face, partially concealed by a tangle of thorny brush. Inside, the roar of the storm muted to a deep, rushing growl. The air was cool, damp, smelling of stone and earth. Utter darkness swallowed them. Tutsaya lowered the girl gently onto a bed of dry grasses. He kept replenished near the back wall. He moved with practiced efficiency in the pitch black. Flint struck steel, sparks cascading onto a nest of dried moss and shredded cedar bark. A tiny flame bloomed, hesitant at first, then growing bolder as he fed it carefully with twigs, then larger pieces of wood from a small, precious store. Warm, flickering light pushed back the shadows, revealing the shallow cave. Smooth walls worn by time, a low ceiling, the precious seep spring glistening in a natural stone basin at the rear. In the firelight, the girl looked impossibly young and broken. Her face was gaunt, shadows pooling under her eyes. Dust and grime coated her skin. The raw wounds on her wrists stood out lividly against her pale skin. Her breathing was still too fast, too shallow. Tutsaya dampened a scrap of soft hide with cool water from the seep. He knelt beside her and began, with infinite gentleness, to clean the dirt from her face. She didn't stir. He worked methodically, wiping away the grime around her eyes, her mouth, the curve of her jaw. He saw the faint tracery of faded freckles across her nose. He saw the stubborn set of her chin, even in unconsciousness. He cleaned her wrists next, the touch light as thistledown, washing away the grit and dry blood. He applied a poultice of crushed yarrow leaves and spiderweb from his pouch. The knowledge passed down, a small act of healing in the vast indifference. He warmed water in a small, smoke-blackened pot near the fire, adding crumbled dried rabbit meat and a few precious wild onions he gathered days before. The simple broth began to scent the cave, a fragile counterpoint to the storm's fury outside. He watched her, the rise and fall of her chest, the slight tremble in her hands. Who was she? What violence had cast her adrift on this unforgiving sea of rock and wind? The questions hung heavy in the quiet cave, unanswered. As the night deepened and the storm finally began to relent, its fury spent, Tatsaya took a small piece of smooth, pale juniper wood from his pouch and his flint knife. By the firelight, his strong, scarred hands began to carve. Not the intricate patterns of his ancestors he sometimes traced in the dust, but a single, strong symbol. A stylized sun, its rays reaching out like open arms. It was simple, potent. Tuhu, the sun-giver, warmth, life, direction. He carved slowly, the rhythmic scrape of flint on with the only sound besides the crackle of the fire and the girl's breathing. It wasn't just whittling. It was a silent invocation, a focus of the hope stirring uneasily within him, a hope he thought long buried with his family. Dawn approached, a thin, gray light seeping into the cave mouth, washing out the fire's glow. The rain had stopped. The world outside dripped inside. The girl stirred. A soft moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Those storm-gray eyes, clouded with confusion and residual terror, focused slowly on the unfamiliar face above her, dark, watchful, etched with lines of solitude and sorrow, but devoid of threat. They darted around the cave, taking in the fire, the stone walls, the carved juniper wood resting beside her on the grass. She opened her mouth, perhaps to scream, perhaps to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound emerged. Her gaze locked onto the water-skinned Tatsaya, silently offered. He helped her raise her head, supporting her, letting the cool water trickle slowly between her cracked lips. She drank greedily, desperately, a small sound of relief escaping her. When she finished, she sank back, exhausted but undeniably present. Her eyes found his again, wide and questioning, filled with vulnerability that mirrored the vast, wounded landscape outside. She opened her mouth once more, a flicker of desperate need in her gaze. Before she could force sound, Tatsaya picked up the carved juniper sun. He held it out to her, not placing it in her injured hands, but laying it gently on the blanket of grasses beside her, where she could see it clearly in the strengthening dawn light. He met her bewildered stare, his own eyes holding a depth of quiet understanding that seemed to reach beyond words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough from disuse, yet imbued with a quiet certainty that resonated in the stillness of the cave. "Pia Nʉmʉnʉ," he said, the Comanche words falling softly, like stones into deep water. Dawn person. He saw the confusion deepen in her eyes, the unspoken question swirling. But beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, something else flickered. A spark of recognition? Not the words, perhaps, but the gesture, the naming, the sheer, unexpected act of being seen, of being given a place, however temporary, in the vast, lonely world. She looked down at the carved sun beside her, its simple lines glowing softly in the new light. A sudden, sharp sound shattered the fragile quiet, the unmistakable, high-pitched whinny of a horse, not far from cave entrance. Close, too close. The horse's whinny hung in the cave's sudden silence, like a splinter of ice. Tatsaya moved before the echo faded, a coiled spring released. One hand pressed flat against the damp stone floor, silencing his own breath. The other hovered near the flint knife at his belt. Outside, the dripping world held its breath. Dawn's gray light, thin and tentative as spider silk, seeped through the cave mouth, painting the stone in watery hues. The storm's rage had dissolved into a hush broken only by the plink-plink of water falling from juniper branches and the shallow, rapid breathing of the girl beside him. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ's storm-gray eyes widened, locking onto Tutsaya's face. The fragile moment of naming shattered. Terror flooded back, raw and immediate. She flinched away, scrambling backwards on a grass pallet until her shoulders met the cool cave wall, her bandaged wrists clutched protectively to her chest. Her gaze darted wildly between the cave entrance and the carved juniper sun, now lying forgotten on the blanket. The symbol of dawn felt suddenly fragile, a lie whispered against the unknown threat outside. Tutsaya didn't look at her. His entire being was focused outward, listening to the stone, to the dripping brush. He knew the rhythms of this high desert parahuya. A lone horse, especially after such a storm, rarely meant good fortune. It could be a scout for the men who'd bound her, or worse, a trap laid for a solitary Comanche known to haunt these canyons. The memory of Tupu's laughter, bright as sunlight on water, flickered in his mind, a sharp, painful counterpoint to the danger. He had failed to protect his family from the invisible sickness. He would not fail this broken dawn person, not a man who used wire and rope. He rose with the silent fluidity of smoke. A gesture, flat palm held low, told Pia Nʉmʉnʉ to stay, to be still. He saw the tremor in her thin frame, the fear screaming silently in her eyes, but she pressed her lips together, biting back any sound. Good. Silence was a shield. He moved to the cave mouth, blending with the deeper shadows cast by the overhang and the thorny chaparral guarding the entrance. Crouching low, he peered through a narrow gap in the brush. Outside, the world was washed clean and raw. Rainwater glistened on the red rock slopes, pooling in hollow sagebrush, bent and battered by the storm, released a pungent, wet earth scent. The air tasted cold and sharp. Below the cave, the shallow basin where the seep spring gathered was a mirror reflecting the bruised dawn sky. And there, on the far side of the basin, stood the horse, a rangy bay, head drooping, reins tangled in a low creosote bush. Its coat was streaked with mud, its flanks heaving. It bore no saddle, only a simple rope hackamore. No rider was visible. Tutsaya's eyes scanned the surrounding slopes, the brush-choked gullies, the jagged ridgeline silhouetted against the lightening sky. Nothing moved but the drip of water and a solitary raven circling high overhead. Yet, the absence of a rider was more unsettling than his presence. Men didn't abandon horses lightly in this country. His gaze returned to the basin. The mud near the water's edge was churned. He traced a chaotic pattern, hoof prints staggering, circling, then leading away from the spring toward a cluster of large boulders near the base of the opposite slope. One set of prints. Only one. He slipped back into the cave. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ hadn't moved, but her eyes followed him, huge and questioning. He knelt by the fire, adding 2 thicker pieces of cedar wood. The flames leapt, casting long, dancing shadows. He took the small pot, scooped water from the seep basin within the cave, and placed it near the heat. Then he took his bow and quiver. The message was clear. He was leaving the cave. Her breath hitched. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at him, a mute plea in her eyes. Don't go. Don't leave me. He met her gaze, held it for a heartbeat. He pointed to the fire, then to the carved sun beside her. His meaning was simple. Stay. Warmth. Light. He then touched his own chest, then gestured toward the entrance. I return. It was a promise, fragile as the dawn itself. He saw the struggle in her face, the ingrained terror warring with the dawning realization that this man, this silent presence, had cut her bonds, tended her wounds, named her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she gave the faintest nod. Her hand crept out, fingers brushing the smooth with a carved sun, as if anchoring herself to it. Tutsaya moved like a ghost. He skirted the seep basin, staying low, using the cover of dripping junipers and greasewood. His moccasins made no sound on the wet stone. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and bruised sage. He reached the boulders, pressing his back against the cool, wet stone. Listening, only the weary sigh of the wind in the higher canyons and the horse's soft snort. He edged around the largest boulder. The rider lay sprawled in the mud, half concealed by a thorny ocotillo. A white man, young, perhaps no older than 20. His face was unnaturally pale beneath streaks of grime and a shock of damp, sandy hair. His simple homespun shirt was dark with blood high on the left shoulder, the stain spreading down his side, diluted pink by rainwater. One hand clutched a rusty, single-shot pistol, unfired. His breathing was shallow, ragged, his eyes closed. Unconscious, or dying, Tutsaya scanned the immediate area again. No sign of others. Just this lone youth, wounded, separated from his mount in the storm. The pistol was a threat, but a feeble one in this state. The Comanche's instincts warred. Leave him. The desert would claim him soon enough. He was Taibo, a white man. Trouble. Yet the image of the girl, bound and abandoned, flashed before him. Was this youth one of them? Or another victim? He saw the boy's cracked lips, the desperate clutch on a useless weapon. He was just a boy, lost and bleeding. With silent efficiency, Tutsaya disarmed him, slipping the pistol into his own belt. He checked the wound. A deep gash, likely from a fall onto rocks during the storm. Not a bullet. Infection would kill him faster than blood loss. Tutsaya moved quickly. He gathered dried yucca leaves from a sheltered crevice nearby, crushed them between stones into rough fibers, and packed the wound as best he could without water. It was a temporary measure, a gesture as much for his own uneasy conscience as for the boy. He couldn't bring him to the cave. The risk to Pia Nʉmʉnʉ was too great. He left the boy lying as he was, sheltered somewhat by the ocotillo, a canteen of water placed just within reach if he woke. Survival was the desert's test. It was all he could offer. Back in the cave, the smell of simmering rabbit broth filled the space. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ sat rigidly upright, the carved sun clutched tightly in her uninjured hand. Her eyes flew to him as he entered, relief washing over her face. So visibly it was like watching tension drain from a drawn bowstring. She hadn't touched the broth, waiting. He secured the rusty pistol high, on a ledge, out of sight. Then he knelt by the fire, using a gourd ladle. He poured some of the warm, thin broth into a smaller, smoke-blackened cup. He offered it to her. She hesitated, then reached out with her free hand, her fingers brushing his as she took the cup. The contact was fleeting, electric. She didn't recoil. She lifted the cup, sipping slowly, her eyes watching him over the rim. The warmth seemed to seep into her, softening the sharp edges of fear in her face. He took a cup for himself, eating silently. The cave was quiet, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the sound of their cautious consumption. The carved sun lay in her lap now. He watched her trace the carved rays with a fingertip, a frown of concentration on her brow. It was a small thing, this act of touching the symbol he'd made, a tiny bridge across the chasm of their unknown worlds. Later, as the sun climbed higher, sending shafts of dusty gold into the cave, Tutsaya prepared a fresh poultice for her wrists. He gathered materials openly. Crushed sage leaves for cleansing, softened beeswax from a small pouch, a pinch of powdered golden currant root to soothe. He gestured for her to extend her arms. She did, slowly, holding them out. The raw rope burns livid against her pale skin. Her eyes were wary but curious. He didn't speak. Instead, he showed her. He dipped his fingers in the seep water, cleaned his hands meticulously. Then he took a pinch of the crushed sage, held it up for her to see, and gently applied it to the edge of one wound. He minded blowing away dust. Cleanse. Next, the beeswax, warmed slightly by the fire, smoothed carefully over the abrasions. Protect. Finally, the golden currant root powder, a fine yellow dust sprinkled lightly. Heal. He looked at her, then at the materials, inviting her understanding. This wasn't just treatment. It was a language, the language of the earth, of survival, the language he knew. She watched, mesmerized. When he finished bandaging her wrists with fresh strips of soft hide, she didn't pull away. She looked down at her hands, then up at him, Her lips parted. A sound emerged, hoarse, barely a whisper. Ank. It was broken and used, but unmistakable. Her first word to him. Not a scream, not a plea. Gratitude. A fragile peace settled in the cave, warmer than the fire. Tutsaya showed her the seep spring within the cave, cupping his hands to drink. She mimicked him, the cool water a balm. He pointed to specific plants drying near the entrance, desert willow bark for fever, prickly pear pads for thirst. She listened, her eyes reflecting the firelight, absorbing the silent lessons. He saw a spark there, not just survival, but the dawning flicker of curiosity. As the afternoon sun slanted long shadows across the cave floor, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ drifted into an uneasy sleep, exhaustion finally claiming her. Tutsaya sat near the entrance, mending a frayed bowstring, his senses still tuned to the outside. The peace felt earned, fragile. The boy by the spring was a shadow on it. He heard the whimper first, a soft, distressed sound from the girl. Then, her body tense on the grass pallet, her head thrashed side to side. "No," she mumbled, the word thick with sleep and terror. "Not," the cellar. "Pa, please." Her bandaged hands clenched, knuckles white. "Don't lock." A choked sob escaped her. Elara run. Elara. The name hung in the quiet cave, stark and real. Her name? A sister? A plea? Her thrashing intensified. A silent scream contorted her features. Trapped in the nightmare's grip, Tutsaya was at her side instantly. He didn't grab her. He placed a hand gently, firmly on her shoulder. "Pia Nʉmʉnʉ," he said, his voice low but resonant in a confined space. "Dawn person." He repeated it, a grounding chant against the dark memory. "Pia Nʉmʉnʉ." Her eyes flew open, wide with residual horror, gasping for air. She stared at him, disoriented, the nightmare still clinging. Then recognition flooded in, followed by a wave of shame so profound she curled on herself, turning her face away, burying it in the grass. Her shoulders shook with silent tears. The word cellar, the name Elara, the desperate pa. They were pieces of the past too terrible to face in the light of day, scattered on the floor of the cave she'd been named in. Tutsaya didn't press. He simply sat beside her, a silent presence in the face of her storm. Outside, the raven called again, a harsh cry echoing across the canyons. Down by the Seep Spring Basin, unseen by either, the wounded boy stirred, his fevered eyes blinking open, fixing dazedly on the distant cave mouth partially hidden by brush. His mud-caked hand weakly grasped the canteen Tutsaya had left. The boy's eyelids, crusted with mud and exhaustion, fluttered open. Pain was a white-hot brand searing through his shoulder, radiating down his arm. The world swam, a blur of bruised purple sky, the stark wet red of the boulder beside him, the glint of sunlight on the Seep Spring Basin. His mouth tasted of blood and dust. He fumbled weakly, his fingers closing around the cool metal of the canteen Tutsaya had left. Greedily, he gulped tepid water, the axe sending fresh waves of agony through his torn muscles. His vision cleared, sharpening on the opposite slope. Movement? No, just the wind teasing the thorny, brush guarding. Something, a shadow deeper than the rest. An opening, a cave. His fevered mind latched onto it. Shelter, water, maybe help. He tried to push himself up, a groan escaping his cracked lips, collapsing back against the unforgiving rock. The cave mouth seemed to watch him, a dark, unblinking eye in the sun-blasted face of the cliff. Inside the cave, the air hung thick with the aftermath of the nightmare. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ lay curled on her side, facing the wall, her breath hitching in ragged gasps. The carved sun was clutched so tightly in her hand that it would seem part of her flesh. The words, Elara, cellar, pa, echoed in the silence, sharp as flint shards. Tutsaya stood near the entrance, a silhouette against the harsh midday light filtering through the brush screen. He hadn't moved since her cry, but his entire being was tuned outward, listening beyond the cave's damp stillness, beyond the girl's stifled sobs. He'd heard the boy's groan, faint but distinct, carried on the dry breeze now replacing the storm's damp chill. The boy was awake, and he'd seen the cave, the desert outside baked under the climbing sun. Heat shimmered above the wet stones of the basin, turning the air liquid. Cicadas droned, a relentless metallic hum that seemed to amplify the silence rather than break it. Tutsaya moved silently back from the entrance. He retrieved the boy's rusty pistol from its high ledge. Its weight was foreign, unwelcome in his hand, a symbol of the chaotic violence encroaching on his solitude. He checked a single crude cartridge, then thrust the weapon into his belt, hidden beneath his shirt. Protection, not preference. He knelt by the small fire, now just embers breathing faint warmth. Using a stick, he carefully banked the coals, preserving their life. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ shifted slightly, sensing his movement. Her shoulders were rigid with tension. He saw the tremor in her back, the way her fingers dug into the carved sun. The cellar door in her mind was still open, darkness spilling out. He needed to anchor her, anchor himself. From a small, worn pouch woven from rabbit skin, he took a pinch of fine, ochre-colored earth pigment. He moved to a relatively smooth patch of cave floor near Pia Nʉmʉnʉ. Without looking at her, he began to draw. His fingers, callous and strong, moved with deliberate grace. First, a circle, large and encompassing. Then within it, for distinct points, connected by lines radiating outward. He added small, stylized symbols at each point. A wavy line for water in the west, a jagged peak for mountains in the north, a sprouting plant for the earth in the east, and a stylized sun, much like the one he'd carved for her in the south. It was a simple representation of the four directions, a map of the world, a compass for the spirit. Numu Tekwapu, the people's understanding of balance. He hadn't drawn it since teaching to Huya the stories. He felt rather than saw Pia Nʉmʉnʉ turn. Her breathing had quieted. He sensed her gaze on the drawing, on his hands moving in the soft dust. He didn't explain. He simply drew, pouring a quiet focus into the act, a silent prayer for grounding, for protection, for the strength of the land itself. The rhythmic scrape of his finger in the dirt filled a space where words couldn't go. He pointed to the eastern symbol, the sprout, then touched his chest, then hers. Life here. Now, he traced the circle encompassing them all. Wholeness. Her hand, still clutching the wooden sun, slowly uncurled. Her fingertip, trembling slightly, reached out and touched the edge of the ochre circle he'd drawn. She traced it hesitantly, her eyes wide, absorbing the silent language of the earth. A fragile calm seemed to seep into her, pushing back the lingering terror of the cellar. She looked from the drawing to Tutsaya's face, her storm-gray eyes holding a question deeper than words. He nodded, a single, grave dip of his chin. Understand. He rose then, gesturing for her to stay. He needed to see. He slipped through the brush screen, melting into the landscape like a shadow cast by a passing hawk. The heat hit him like a wall. He scaled the ridge above the cave, moving with the silent patience of centuries, using juniper trunks and rock outcrops for cover. From the vantage point, he could see the entire seat basin, the boulders, the boy. The youth hadn't moved far. He'd managed to drag himself a few painful yards closer to the water, leaving a smeared trail in the drying mud. He was propped against a rock now, head lolling, the canteen empty beside him. His face was flushed with fever beneath the grime. He muttered incoherently, his good hand plucking weakly at his blood-stained shirt. Tutsaya watched, assessing. The boy was weak, disoriented, no immediate threat. But his presence was a beacon. If he called out, if others were searching, Tutsaya scanned the horizons, the distant mesas hazy in heat. Nothing stirred but the wind and the circling ravens. Yet, he spent the afternoon in watchful tension. He showed Pia Nʉmʉnʉ how to carefully tend the fire embers, adding tiny sticks without smothering them. She mimicked his movements, her bandaged hands clumsy but determined. He pointed out specific plants near the cave mouth. The silvery sage for cleansing smoke, the tough fibers of yucca leaves for cordage. He handed her a smooth river stone and a small piece of dried rabbit hide, miming the action of scraping it clean. A simple, absorbing task. She took it, focusing intently, the rhythmic scrape, a counterpoint to the desert's drone. He saw the focus ease a haunted look from her eyes, if only for a while. As the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in streaks of molten copper and deepening violet, Tutsaya ventured down to the seep spring with a waterskin. He moved openly this time, a calculated risk. He needed water, and he needed the boy to see him, to know he was observed. He filled the skin, his back to the boulders, every sense screaming alertness. He could feel the boy's gaze, weak but persistent, burning into him. He turned. The boy stared, his eyes glassy with fever, but holding a spark of desperate awareness. His lips moved. "Water," he rasped, the sound barely audible over the sighing wind. "Help, please." Tutsaya stood, motionless, the full waterskin heavy in his hand. The plea hung in the cooling air. He saw the raw fear in the boy's eyes, the vulnerability beneath the grime and blood. It mirrored Pia Nʉmʉnʉ's own terror, yet this was Taibwa, the unknown quantity. A trick? Genuine need? He took a step closer, then stopped, his hand resting near the hidden pistol. He wouldn't bring him to the cave. He couldn't, but the desert code, older than tribal lines, whispered of shared suffering. Silently, deliberately, Tutsaya placed a full waterskin on a flat rock halfway between them. It was an offering, a test. He met the boy's fevered gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the cave, disappearing into the brush without a backward glance. Let the boy decide his own path. Back in the cave, twilight softened the edges of the stone. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ was still scraping the hide, the repetitive motion soothing. The ochre circle on the floor glowed softly in the firelight. She looked up as he entered, her eyes questioning. He shook his head slightly, a gesture encompassing the outside world, the complication. He refilled the small pot from the seep within the cave, adding more dried meat and wild onions. The simple act of preparing food felt like an anchor. He sat near her, taking up a piece of sinew and beginning to relash the head of a stone axe. The quiet companionship, the shared tasks, built a fragile bridge. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ finished scraping her piece of hide. She held it out, showing him the clean surface. A small, tentative smile touched her lips, fleeting as a desert moth. It was the first light he'd seen in her eyes that wasn't born of fear. He nodded, a flicker of approval in his own eyes. He pointed to the cleaned hide, then to her feet, miming the making of new foot coverings. Her smile widened slightly, a fragile bloom in the gathering dusk. She touched the carved sun at her side, then pointed toward the cave entrance, towards a fading light outside. A question. "Pia Nʉmʉnʉ," he affirmed softly, dawn person, belonging to the light. The moment shattered. From outside, carried on the evening breeze, snaking down from the ridge, came a sound that froze the blood in Tutsaya's veins. Not a groan, not a plea. A voice, young, strained with pain and fever, but loud enough to carry, calling out, not for water, not for help. "Elara!" The boy's voice cracked across the stillness. "Elara, you out here?" Pa's gone wild. He's looking. Inside the cave, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ went utterly still. The scraped hide slipped from her fingers. The tentative light in her eyes snuffed out, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Her face drained of all color. She stared at the cave entrance, not seeing Tutsaya, not seeing the fire, seeing only the echoing name, the specter of the cellar door slamming shut. Her lips formed a silent, desperate denial. No. The name Elara hung in the cooling twilight air like a shard of broken glass, sharp and dangerous. Inside the cave, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ didn't scream. She imploded, the scraped hide forgotten, the carved sun falling from her limp fingers. She folded it on herself, drawing her knees tight to her chest, arms wrapped around her head as if warding off blows. A low, animal moan vibrated in her throat, the sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The cellar door in her mind wasn't just open. It yawned, swallowing the fragile piece of the cave, the ochre circle on the floor, the tentative trust. Her father, searching, wild. The word echoed the storm's fury, a different kind of tempest closing in. Tutsaya moved, not toward the entrance, but towards her. He crouched before her huddled form, his presence a solid wall against the echoing fear. He didn't touch her, not yet. His voice, when it came, was low, a bedrock sound beneath the tremor of her terror. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ, he said, the name a talisman, a lifeline thrown into the dark waters of her past. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ. He repeated it, each syllable a steady beat against the chaos summoned by the name Elara. Outside, the boy's voice rose again, weaker, slurred by fever and pain, but desperate. Elara, please, gotta hide. Pa's got the shotgun, says he'll. The words dissolved into a ragged cough. Tutsaya's eyes, hard as obsidian, met Pia Nʉmʉnʉ's wild, tear-filled gaze. He saw the unspoken question, is he one of them? He saw the memory of the fence post, the cruel rope. He pointed to her chest, then to the ochre circle encompassing the 4 directions drawn on the cave floor. You are here, safe. Then he pointed toward the cave entrance, his expression grave. He brings danger. He rose, the hidden way of the boy's pistol, a cold knot against his hip. He gestured for her to stay, to be silent as stone. The time for offering water was past. The desert demanded a reckoning. The twilight deepened, painting the seat basin in shades of indigo and charcoal. The air, cooling rapidly, carried the scent of damp sage and the metallic tang of distant rain. Tutsaya emerged from the brush screen not like a predator, but like a shadow given form. He walked deliberately towards a cluster of boulders where the boy lay, his moccasins silent on the wet stone. He stopped 10 paces away, a respectful distance that was also a boundary. The boy's head lolled towards him, his eyes glassy with fever, his face flushed and sweating despite the chill. Who are you? Tutsaya's voice cut through the boy's labored breathing. Speaking in the Taiwa tongue, the words unfamiliar and harsh in his mouth, but necessary. Why do you call that name? The boy flinched, blinking as if trying to focus. Caleb, he rasped. Caleb Miller. Elara Miller's my sister. He coughed, a wet, painful sound. Pa! He locked her in the root cellar weeks after Ma died. Said she was wild, needed breaking. He shuddered, a spasm of pain or memory. I helped her out last night. Cut the lock. We ran, storm hit. Riders, not sure whose, found us. Took her. Shot at me. I fell, lost her. Tears mixed with the grime on his cheeks. Pa's gone mad with grief or rage. He's hunting me now too, likely. Said he'd put her down like a mad dog. His voice broke on a sob. You seen her? Elara? Please. She's all I got left. Inside the cave, pressed against the cold stone wall near the entrance, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ heard. Sister, Caleb. The cellar door creaked open not onto pure darkness, but onto fragmented images. A boy's face, younger, smiling as they shared stolen berries. The suffocating dampness of the cellar, the taste of dirt and despair. The frantic flight through the storm, Caleb's hand gripping hers, then the searing pain as she was ripped away, bound, abandoned. The name Elara wasn't just a name, it was a prison sentence. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ was the first light glimpsed through the cracks. Tutsaya absorbed Caleb's words. The boy was no captor. He was another victim of the same man's violence, another soul cast adrift. The pistol felt heavier, useless against this kind of poison. He saw the boy's wound, the fever burning him alive. Leaving him was a death sentence, and the desert would be slow and cruel. Bringing him into the cave, where the sight of him might shatter Pia Nʉmʉnʉ's fragile spirit, was unthinkable. He made a decision. He moved past Caleb, deeper into the boulders, finding a shallow depression shielded from the wind and casual sight. He gathered dry grasses, built a small, smokeless fire pit. Returning, he hauled Caleb up, ignoring the boy's gasp of pain, half carrying, half dragging him to the sheltered hollow. He redressed the wound with fresh yucca fibers, forcing water between Caleb's cracked lips. "Fire," he said curtly, pointing to the pit. "Warmth. Stay hidden. Dawn comes." He placed a canteen and a small pouch of dried meat beside the boy. It wasn't sanctuary, but it was a chance. The desert's test shared. Back in the cave, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ hadn't moved from the entrance. Her face was tear-streaked, but the paralyzing terror had receded, replaced by a profound, weary sorrow. She looked at Tutsaya, her storm-gray eyes holding the knowledge of the cellar, the brother, the mad father. He saw the question, "What now?" He didn't answer with words. He went to the fire, adding wood. The flames leapt, casting long, protective shadows. From his pouch, he took the small piece of juniper what he'd begun carving days before and his flint knife. He sat cross-legged by the fire, the ochre circle at his side. He began to carve again, not the sun this time, but something new, something deeper. He carved a juniper tree, strong roots reaching into the earth, branches stretching toward the sky, and nestled within its branches a small, stylized bird taking flight. Pia, the sun, was carved above it, its rays embracing both tree and bird. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ watched, drawn from the precipice of her past by the rhythmic scrape of a knife. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the fire's song, the distant cry of a night bird, and the unspoken understanding flowing between them. She moved closer, sitting opposite him, the firelight dancing on her face. Her gaze traced the emerging figures in the wood, the rooted strength, the fragile flight, the encompassing sun. He saw her hand reach out, not to take the carving, but to touch the ochre circle on the ground beside him, tracing the symbol for the east, the sprout of new life. As the deepest night settled, Tutsaya spoke, his voice a low murmur blended with the fire's crackle. He spoke not in Taibwa, but in Numu Tekwapu, the Comanche words flowing like a hidden stream. He spoke of Pia, the sun, who saw everything, whose light revealed truth and warmed the spirit. He spoke of the strength of the earth, the resilience of roots that held fast even in the hardest ground. He spoke of flight, not as escape, but as the claiming of one's own sky. He didn't translate, but the meaning resonated in the cave's sacred space, weaving around Pia Nʉmʉnʉ, a ritual of naming far deeper than before. It was a blessing, a map for her spirit. When the first true light of dawn, Pia Nʉmʉnʉ, began to stain the eastern sky with streaks of rose and gold, Tutsaya finished the carving. He held it out to her, not a command, but an offering. The rooted juniper, the bird in flight, embraced by the sun. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ looked from the carving to his face, etched with lines of sorrow and unexpected kindness. She looked toward the cave entrance, towards the seat basin where her brother lay hidden. The cellar door hadn't vanished, but it no longer held her captive. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cool dawn air filling her lungs. She reached out and took the carving, her fingers closing around the smooth wood, feeling the strength of the tree, the freedom of the bird, the warmth of the sun. She held it against her chest. Then she looked directly at Tutsaya, her eyes clear, holding the dawn light. Her voice, when it came, was soft and used but steady as stone. "Pia Nʉmʉnʉ," she said, claiming it, owning it. She was dawn person. Tutsaya nodded, a deep sense of peace settling within him, a peace he hadn't known since before the sickness took his family. The ghost of Tupues's smile seemed to touch the edges of his memory, not with pain, but with quiet approval. Together, they walked out into the newborn day. The air was crisp, scented with sage and wet earth. The Seep Spring Basin lay quiet below. Caleb's small fire was cold ash. A set of tracks, unsteady but determined, led away westward, following the path of the retreating night. Caleb had chosen his path. Tutsaya led Pia Nʉmʉnʉ up the ridge behind the cave, higher than he climbed before. They reached a flat expanse of wind-scoured rock, a natural altar facing the rising sun. Below, the vastness of Parahoya unfolded. Mesas like sleeping giants, canyons holding secrets, the endless sky. Tutsaya took the carved piece from her hands. He knelt, found a crevice in the rock, and wedged the carving securely within it. The juniper tree and the bird facing the dawn, a marker, a testament, a belonging etched in wood and stone. Pia Nʉmʉnʉ stood beside him. She didn't look back toward the east, toward the life of Elara Miller in the shadow of the cellar. She faced the sun, Pia, its golden light washing over her, warming the wood of the carving, illuminating the vast, wild land that was now her home. She placed her hand over the carving, feeling its solid presence, then lifted her face fully to the dawn. She didn't need to speak her name again. It was written in the light on her face, in the quiet strength of her stance, in the rooted flight symbolized on the rock. She was here. She was Pia Nʉmʉnʉ, and the desert, ancient and enduring, held her in its silent embrace.